All right, welcome everybody. Kids, you guys can head to the kids zone. I think they're all on Josh and Julie's row, so head to the kids zone. I don't know how that happened. It's kind of like when you go to a restaurant, if you have kids, and then you look up and you're like, oh, they put us in the kids section. Fun, you know? I think that's what happened over here. That's really good. Welcome everyone. It's good to have everyone here today. Like Greg said earlier, we have a new app we've been going off of called Church Center. So download the Church Center app. You can follow along with the notes of what we're talking about today. But we're talking today about this series called Equally Complicated, because men and women are both equally complicated. And I think sometimes we all think that the other gender is the one that's complicated. Well, I guess no one really thinks that men are complicated, but you get the idea. We are equally complicated when it comes down to it. And we're going to be speaking in a lot of generalities here because I know men and women are all different. And a lot of times, like Autumn and I very much show the opposite of what you would expect. And I have a lot of like the traits that, I don't know how to say this well.
He likes chick flicks and I don't. That's what he's trying to say.
Okay, so, but today we're specifically talking about communication, and often I think like women and men just communicate very differently. Like I've heard Zarina like use 35 words to say something that could have taken 2. And that's not a bad thing, but it's real. And I'm going to pick on Tracy. Tracy will say 2 where you probably should have used 35. So a couple months ago, Josh and I were talking to Tracy, and Tracy's legally blind, and we're like, what is it like to like be blind? And he's like, well, I can see about this much. And I was like, oh, so like you can't even like see more than my face. He's like, no, I definitely can't see all of you without turning my head. And I was like, that is the worst put down I've ever been told. Like, that was amazing. I love that. It seriously is one of my favorite things that's ever happened. But generally, communication is one of those things where men and women see things and do things very differently. So what is communication? I think most of us kind of know what it is, but at its core, it's more than just talking to somebody, right? Like, I saw an interview one time with Elon Musk where they were talking about the future of technology. I'm a geek, so just go with me. And they were like, how long until we're all androids and we just like think using the internet? And he was like, essentially, we already are androids. Like, we have all of the information at our fingertips, but the download speed is really slow. Like, so we have all of this information, but getting it into our heads and then getting it to the next person is really hard. And I kind of think that's what communication is like. Like, if the person you're talking to could just download all of your thoughts, all of your feelings, all of your stuff, and you could just like get it to them instantly, communication would be really easy. You would also really have to like scrub some stuff out, and like we'd have to look more like Jesus for that to be possible. But communication is the process of taking all the stuff that's happening up here, because you're a very complex person. People are just complex. You've got thoughts, you've got emotions, you've got all of these deep like inner processes that we have to filter out to kind of look like Jesus, and then in some way, shape, or form communicate with somebody else. And especially when it's a guy communicating with a girl, not just in a romantic sense, but just like men and women talking. A lot of times there's a lot of things you have to get past to get it to make sense. It's kind of an art. And I love what Ephesians 4:29 says, specifically in the Amplified version. I like the way the verbiage here works. Do not let worthless words ever come out of your mouth, but only such speech as is good for building up others according to the need and the occasion, so that it will be a blessing to those who hear you speak. So communication is not only getting everything in here and everything in here out, it's filtering it through, how do I make this positive? How do I make this uplifting? How do I encourage this person? So we're talking a lot today about what healthy communication is. So I'm going to kick it off to Autumn because she's way better at healthy communication than me, and I'm still learning.
That was kind, but probably not true. All right. I don't know about you guys. I've really enjoyed this sermon series so far. Just like getting to hear from, we don't do this a whole lot, but getting to hear from like both genders on a topic and just like hear the different perspectives and all that, I think is really kind of a fun way to look at this. But Yale's right. Communication is one of those things that, like, in all honesty, I'll say it this way. About 90% of what you're going to hear today has a lot less to do with like gender things and more to do with honestly kind of personality style or generational differences or just demographics of where you grew up and how you grew up and that kind of thing than it does specifically about gender. But at the same time, like there are a lot of things when it comes to communication that are like typically male or typically female. So everybody like make a pact that we're not going to get like offended if I say, men, you do this and women, you do this. And you're like, no, I don't. Like, okay. Maybe you do what the women do instead. Sorry. Either way, like, let's just change. And people are like, Jesus. Cool? Sound good? Great. All right. Let's jump into this. Okay, so to start off, we're going to talk about just beginning with just what are some ground rules of communication, right? What are some basic ground rules of solid communication? The first one is this: communication needs to be Christ-like. I know, duh, we're in church, right? Okay, you get it. We had to start there, right? But we do have to start there, right? Because everything we do is about the gospel, right? That's how we talk as a church. That's what we say all the time, living out our faith. Everything that we do, every way that we live, every way that we communicate, every way that we do everything is about representing Jesus to people around us, right? And if we can do that well in our communication, then it changes everything. Like, you shouldn't come to church and hear a sermon about communication that would sound just like a TED Talk, okay? You should come to church and hear things that the Bible says, so just a reminder there. So the way we communicate matters significantly more than even what we say, all right? And the way that we communicate, like, do you sound like Jesus when you're talking? By the way that you sound like Jesus when you're talking is by being in relationship with him, right? Reading the Bible, having the word of God in your heart. Do you sound like Jesus when you're communicating with people? Whether you're communicating good, fun stuff or whether you're communicating hard things together. Do you sound like Jesus, right? Do they feel the love of Jesus when they talk to you? So it's also about that, right? It's not just, well, I said it and I said I love you, but do they feel loved by you in that conversation? Even if it's a hard, difficult, and we're going to talk about conflict in a minute, but even if it's a conflict, hard conversation that you're having with someone, do they walk away from that feeling like they just got punched in the face? Or do they walk away from that feeling like they just got a big hug? Right? Even in a hard conversation, do they feel the love of Jesus through the hard words that you speak to them? Proverbs 18:21 says this. It says, the tongue has the power of life and death. The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. We have to be careful when we communicate. We have to be careful how we communicate to make sure that we're representing Jesus in every single relationship that we have. And just reminder, this is not a marriage talk. I know we're married. Forget that. That doesn't matter in this moment. That doesn't matter in this moment. This isn't about communication in marriage. This is about communication with one another, right? This is about, like, as brothers and sisters in Christ, like, Kenyon, how do I communicate well with you and make you feel loved and encouraged as my brother in Christ by the way that I communicate, right? That's what this is about. Okay, so communication needs to be Christ-like. Communication also needs to be selfless. Communication is one of those areas where I think it's so easy to just, when you're talking with somebody and you're just missing each other, you're not connecting, to just instantly think, like, why are you not normal? Right? Like, why don't you understand what I'm saying?
Notice how she's not making eye contact with me.
I'm not making eye contact with anybody. But, like, you know, like, we see the world through our lens and through our perspective, right? And when we are able to get outside of our perspective and come to communication with other people from a selfless perspective so that we can actually see what they're hearing and not just see what we're saying, it makes it a much, much easier way to communicate. So, for example, like, if I'm selfless in my communication, then the point of my conversation is going to be about understanding the other person. If I'm selfish, the point is going to be about being heard, right? Now, there's a lot of, like, talk in our culture, like, about being heard and how important that is. Now, I don't want to, like, diminish any kind of mental health things. Like, that's not what this is about. But, like, as believers, the goal of my life is not to be heard, right? The goal of my life is to understand people around me and to be able to communicate the gospel effectively to them. Right? It doesn't matter if, at this point, I know Jesus. It doesn't matter if I communicate, like, what I think. It matters that I communicate it well so that other people can follow, right? That's what it matters. So it's less about being heard and more about understanding one another. Proverbs 18:2, this is a fun one. Proverbs 18:2 says, "The fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion." So there you go. Don't be a fool. Simple enough? Great, move on. So communication, be Christ-like, be selfless. Communication needs to actually happen. That's another ground rule. You got to actually communicate, right? You got to say the things. You got to say the words. Otherwise, you're not communicating, right? If you're just like giving people a bad look, you're not communicating. They don't know why you're bad, right? They can't read your mind. They're not inside your head. Ignoring things doesn't help. Okay, so here's with the gender thing. Like, guys, I'm mostly talking to you right now, right? Typically, guys have a much harder time communicating with words, right? Women, we tend to be a lot better talking things out. At least having a lot more words to talk things out. Whether it's healthy or not, we'll work on that in a minute. But guys, like the kind of classic strong, silent male, that is like, oh, that's like the dreamy. No, it's not. Like, no real girl wants that. I'm telling you right now. Guys in the room, listen to me. No girl wants you to be the strong, silent type. They want you to communicate. Like, they're just like, what on earth are you thinking? Please, just tell me. I'll do anything. Just tell me what you want, all right? Like, that's what we're thinking. And that's what we're thinking from our spouses. That's what we're thinking from our brothers in Christ. Across the board, like, we want to know what's happening inside your head, and we can't read your mind. So Ephesians 4 is a lot of female amens. Don't worry, guys. I'm going after the girls in a minute. Ephesians 4:15 says this. It says, "Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ." So the goal here is growing in maturity, right? But notice the word at the beginning of that says speaking. You can't grow in maturity if all you're doing is thinking about good things, right? You got to speak the things. You got to say things out loud. You got to bring things into the light, right? Like, all of us have been in something in our life that we've been trying to work through or get through and just kind of doing it by ourselves and working on it for years and years and years. And then we finally say it out loud to the person who disciples us, and like within a month or two, we've kicked it. And we're like, why didn't I just do that from the beginning, right? There's so much power in bringing things to the light, speaking things out loud. So guys, please, please, please speak things out loud for your own personal growth, but also for the growth and maturity of all of us in the room. We need you to lead us, men, in this room. You might be sitting there thinking, oh, I'm not a leader in the church. Yes, you are. You're a leader. Every single one of us is a leader. You lead somebody. So somebody is looking to you for leadership. So speak out loud and lead them well. Just praying about things in your head and not saying it out loud doesn't really help. It does help, but not fully. So we need to do more. Okay, girls, I'll leave you alone, guys. Girls, communication does need to actually happen. And I'll say this in this section for the females in the room without looking anywhere. Having a fake conversation with someone while you're stress cleaning your house is not communication. Yeah. Say it again. If you're mad at somebody and you're taking a shower and having a whole conversation with them and you're winning that argument real good, right? You know what I'm talking about? You're like, I get this. Like, we've had this conversation. Now it's cleared up. Now you know what's right. Right? That is not communication because you didn't actually communicate it to them, right? We have to remember that. Girls, don't live in your head. We got to get outside of our heads and say the things that we need to say. And we'll, like I said, we'll get to conflict stuff in a minute, but.
There's so many people right now like, like turn to the person next to them like, you hear that? Yeah, okay. It's good.
Yeah, we all need to hear it. That's good. That's good. All right, so communication needs to actually happen, right? Now, also, communication doesn't always need to happen. Okay, so I'm going to say the exact opposite here. Say the things you need to say, but also don't say the things you don't need to say, right? There's a little thing called discernment. And now, girls, this one's mostly for you. Let's be real. And mostly for the women in the room is what this one is. You don't always have to say everything that comes to your mind. Just because it's in your heart, just because you're thinking it, doesn't mean it's healthy to say it out loud, right?
Like I said, these are generalities because I'm definitely on that side for sure.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So use discernment, right? Discernment is that feeling that, the Holy Spirit inside of you that's like, don't say that, right? But when you're like, but it's funny, but it's good, but they need to hear it, but no, listen to the Holy Spirit. He knows, okay? Just listen to him. Do what he says. Say what he says to say. Don't say what he doesn't say to say. A lot, especially girls, I'll tell you this, a lot of the things that come in your head and come into your heart need to first be worked out in prayer before you ever say them out loud. Don't forget that. And then through prayer, God will say, yeah, go talk to that person about this. Or he'll say, work through that in your heart first. You don't necessarily need to say that. That's an issue that will get taken care of. It's not my timing, right? It's not our goal to fix each other. It's our goal to be a blessing and an encouragement to one another with our words, right? That's where Yale started with that. Proverbs 21:23 says, he who guards his mouth and his tongue guards himself from troubles. So guard your tongue, guard your mouth. You know, it's actually kind of funny as we were putting this together, we were like looking through, there's so much that the Bible has to say about communication, but the reality is like way more of it has to do with holding your tongue than has to do with speaking something. Yeah. Like the Bible says speak the truth, but it says hold your tongue like 35 times.
Yeah. It was like 5-1, don't talk over do talk. You know?
So there you go. Stop talking, but talk.
Yeah, clear as mud. All right, so I want to talk for a minute about like the differences in how we communicate too between gender, but also really just personality differences. So do me a favor, just look around at the people around you. Like just kind of look to the people your left and your right. And I just want you to think like, how differently do you think those people communicate than you? A lot. Yeah. I think everyone just kind of does things differently. So do me a favor, turn to a person next to you and just say, you're not wrong for how you communicate. You're not wrong for how you communicate. All right. Now turn to your spouse if you're married and say, you're always right. No, I'm just kidding. That's the opposite of what we're talking about here today. The point is, anytime you have two people talking, you will have at least 3 different ways of communicating. It is just crazy how many, like how different it is. Romans 14:9 says, let us therefore make every effort to do what leads to peace and to mutual edification. So your goal in communicating is not to get your heart across 100% of the time, or not to get your mind out there 100% of the time. It's to make sure that they are receiving what you're putting out, okay? And if that person communicates differently, you need to realize how they communicate and kind of meet them in the middle. And I think that's the biggest thing about all this is there's like a middle ground of where it's healthy. Now, one of the biggest ways where communication breaks down, and this one I don't think has anything to do with gender. They've done studies to see if men and women are on one side or the other, but it's actually totally split between both, and that's being an internal or external processor. So who knows if they're an internal or external processor? Okay, those are all the external processors. I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding. So an internal processor basically means that when you're trying to think of something, you get quiet and you just think. And then at the end of the time of thinking, you say something, and that is what you think. It is what you believe. It is the final full stop. This is my answer. An external processor, if you're like, hey, what do you think? They just start talking and they eventually arrive at what they think. So I'm an external processor. She's an internal processor. And we should really get off the stage between each other's parts. This is sad. Okay. No, but seriously, like, so as an external processor, I'm going to kind of like go around and try and figure out what I believe. And the final thing I say is what I actually believe. With Autumn, I have to be okay with her not talking for a while and then saying something and she actually means it, you know? And it's really hard when you're one of those communicating with the other one. It's also really hard when you're one of those communicating with the same, you know? 2 external processors are just going to talk over each other. 2 internal processors are going to stare at each other in silence. And you have to learn how to work together with those things. Like even when Autumn and I were writing this, we were like, okay, let's like come together and figure this out. And Autumn had like a list of all the things she was thinking, and I just started talking. And I was like, I think this and this and that. Well, maybe not that, but this. And like we figured out, like, okay, how about you write down your list and I'll just talk and write down everything I say. And then I have a list. Look. And genuinely, neither of them are wrong. And I guarantee you, if you're one of those, you're hearing the other one, and you're saying, how on earth could you do that? There's no way. But people just kind of, think differently. So if you're talking with somebody and you don't know how they communicate, ask them. Like, it's okay to ask them. Also, you can just be friends with them long enough to learn them. and be a studier of the person that you're communicating with.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
I think another thing with that too is, like you said, knowing who you're communicating with and then learning how to communicate in that style. Like, I'm very much an internal processor, but over the course of the last 16 years, I have learned how to externally process because I know that it drives him up the wall. And so sometimes if we're having an important conversation, I have to learn how to say the words out loud. And sometimes when we're having a really important conversation, he has to learn how to be quiet for a minute. You know what I mean? So, like, it's not just like, I'm going to do my thing and you do your thing and maybe it'll work, but like leaning towards one another and moving towards that middle ground of learning how to do it.
Yeah, that's good. So another thing that happens often, or that's a big difference, is over-communicating versus under-communicating. Now, that generally is, like, they've done studies, and, like, generally women are more likely to over-communicate, and men are more likely to under-communicate. Don't shake your head that vigorously. No, it's true. It really is. So women are more likely to take something and connect it to all the different dots of all the different things that are going on in their mind and bring it as one web of, like, this is the thing. And men are more likely to say one or two logical, like, factual things and be like, well, that's it. That's what it is, you know? And
But what about?
yeah, and neither of those is wrong, genuinely. And I think most people would be like, I wish you would do this. I wish you would go to this place. Or I wish you wouldn't go that far. I wish you'd stay back here. And really, seriously, neither of them is wrong. And I think a lot of the frustration comes, like, men, it's really easy to be frustrated when women just keep asking you more questions, or when I just keep asking you more questions. It's not that they're like a detective trying to grill you and trying to get to something deeper. They want to be communicated with at the breadth that they would communicate. And women, watch for the frustration that comes when the person you're talking to, the man that you're talking to in the welcome center says, you're like, how are you doing? And they're like, yeah, pretty great. And you're like, what? Like, great because of why? And they're like, just things are good. You know, like, it's okay to ask for more, but also you can't be frustrated when that's all there is. It's not like they're hiding something from you. That's just how they're communicating. A lot of that communication also happens in a nonverbal way. And that's the next thing, is the difference between verbal and nonverbal communication. And in general, women are more likely to be verbal communicators and men are more likely to be nonverbal communicators. So what that means is that a lot of times when a man gives you like a one-word answer or a really simple thing, he's giving it to you with a lot of body language, with a lot of tone. Like, it's almost like he's speaking an Asian language where like half of it's in tone and you have to really understand that. And on the other side, a lot of times women will look really aggressive when they're saying something, but they're actually communicating really nice things. And men might be like, whoa, what's up? Why are you being this way? So you need to be able to see how they're communicating and understand that. And there's so much depth to this. But like women, if a man is acting that way, it doesn't mean he's cold and heartless and unfeeling. And men, if a woman is acting that way, it doesn't mean they're like filibustering and like trying to get you to crack. Okay? Like, learn how those people communicate and give them the grace to help communicate well. So another part of this that I think is huge, and I think this is the thing that you might not have thought about, is that often when you're angry, you go to the opposite of your normal style. So often men will start getting kind of domineering and kind of pushy and trying to just flood the conversation to gain the upper hand. Women often will go the other direction, and when they're normally likely to over communicate, they'll go the other way and under communicate and just say 2 or 3 things and give you the silent treatment. So that's a pretty normal thing, but think about the fact that if that's their norm of I'm angry, then it's easy for them to look at what you're doing as, oh, they must be angry, when really it's just your norm. So know what your norm is and try and figure out what their norm is, and then don't read into something that's not there. Does that make sense? Yeah. So another part of this too is insecurities. Insecurities are one of those things where I think men and women operate very differently. And this is a pretty gender-specific thing. In general, women are often afraid they will be too much, and men are afraid they won't be enough. So let me say that again. Women are afraid that they'll be perceived as too much, and men are perceived as not, or are afraid they'll be perceived as not being enough. And I think that's part of like how we're wired is generally women are wired to be nurturers who support people around them, who take care of people, who serve people in a selfless way. And the fear is that as they're doing that they'll be perceived as being pushy, as being overwhelming, as like, well, why are you pushing past these boundaries? When they're like, I just want to love you. I just want to take care of you. And men, on the other hand, are wired to be providers and protectors and to take care of the people by like surrounding them and making sure that they're okay. And often the fear is that they're not going to be enough, that they're not going to live up to the standards that are put out there. And those insecurities really dig themselves deep into a bunch of different parts of life. And when I first read that, this is from a psychologist that I read and then started looking at scripture, and there's so much of this in there. But the psychologist was talking about this, and I was like, obviously men are afraid of not being enough, but do you really think women are afraid of being too much? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And I think most men don't know that, and I think most women don't think about the fact that men are afraid of being perceived as not enough. And I think when you see that, it really changes a whole bunch of different things. So on the same side, you want to make sure you're not overcompensating in that. So women, don't try to overcompensate by pushing yourself into a conversation to try and find validation, but also don't retreat and give somebody the silent treatment to see if you'll be pursued. Men,
say that again.
Don't retreat and give the silent treatment to see if you'll be pursued. Men, don't demand respect or allegiance from somebody. It doesn't work. And men also don't run away and try to avoid all conflict to try to protect your pride. Like, because of the very opposite reactions, we're likely to do both too much, because we're looking for that validation. Proverbs 12:18 says, there's one whose rash words are like sword thrusts, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. And again, the through line of this is find the balance and also make sure that you are communicating in a way that they will receive it, not in a way that you feel like you did a good job of giving it. If they didn't get it, it's not communication.
That's good. I'm going to read that verse again. There's one whose rash words are like sword thrusts, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. All right, keep that in your head. Keep that in your heart, because we're going to talk a little bit about conflict. All right. We've done a ton of teachings about conflict at our church. So this is not going to be a super long talk. If that's something that you're like, I don't really know how to biblically handle conflict, great. Go listen to one of our previous sermon series. We've had like whole series on that. So do that. But the main thing and the thing that we want to say today is have it. Do it. Say the words. Have conflict with one another. Conflict is 100% unavoidable in your life. It will happen. How many of you are people who are like, I hate conflict. I will do anything to avoid conflict. Yeah, I know. I could probably just tell you who in the room is which of these things, right? And how many of you are like, no, I don't mind conflict. Like, let's have the conversation. Like, that's just a conversation. Great. Again, neither is wrong. Personality comes into this a lot. Gender does come into this a lot. Like, there's a lot of things that play into our ability to handle conflict. But the reality is all the people that kind of confidently raise their hands of like, yeah, let's have the conversation, the reason they're raising their hands is because they've had the conversations. Like, that's literally it. It's not because they're like, I like a fight. Well, maybe some people. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. No, but like the reason why they feel confident having those conversations is because the reality is they know that they're having that conversation with somebody only because they deeply love them. Like, if I love you enough to have a conversation like that, then, like, I love you enough to work through it to the other side, right? And it's not about, like, again, it's not about me being hurt. It's not about me saying, you hurt my feelings when you did it, right? It's not about that. It's about saying, hey, this happened, and I don't want a breach in our relationship. Like, I love you enough that I want to sit down and have this conversation. And I want to work through it and figure out where was the breakdown and what happened and how can we love each other better moving forward, right? So really it comes down to, do you want to be the type of person that has ongoing healthy communication and has little hard conversations all the time, but you work through them and move through them? Or do you want to be the type of person that just stuffs it and stuffs it and stuffs it until you explode and blow up every relationship in your life?
Choices.
The choices. I mean, it's your choice, really. Like, whatever you want to do with your life is fine. I'm just kidding. But even with that, though, guys, again, back to that speaking the truth in love, right? Conflict has to be rooted in deep love, right? You don't have a conflict conversation when you're just so angry and you're like, I never want to speak to this person again. That's not when you have a conflict conversation. That's when you go to the Lord, right? And pray through it before you get to them, right? Come into a conflict conversation knowing I am in this for their good. And that is why I want to have this conversation. It's not about being heard, but it's sharing your thoughts, your opinions, your perspective with love, with kindness, with gentleness, with respect, all of these things. The gender thing on this, typically, guys tend to approach conflict conversations as a task to get through. It's like, okay, it's logic, it's truth, it's facts, it's this thing happened, and then this happened as a result of that, so can we go back and fix this, right? That's how guys tend to approach conflict conversations. They also tend to approach conflict conversations wanting to deal with one thing at a time. So it's kind of like what he said earlier, how women think as a web and men are more linear. It's the same with conflict, right? It's the same way. This is why in so many marriage conferences and things like that, when they talk about conflict, they always give the advice of, guys, make sure that you're listening to everything that's happening and all the things that she's saying. And then they look at the girls and they say, just stick to one thing, right? Because when you're like, and then 4 years ago, right, that's not helpful, right? So bringing that into, making things a little bit more realistic, making things a little more linear helps in those conflict conversations for guys. Women, we tend to approach conflict conversations as a chain of events, right? If we're at the point of having a conflict conversation, it's likely because there have been a chain of events and emotions that have led to that moment, right? It's probably not a one thing that happened. Now, hopefully we're getting better and better and dealing with things as they come up, so it's not a really long chain of events. But if we're going to have a conflict conversation, it's probably because there's more things going on, and it's going to be very intertwined with feelings and emotions and relationship. So logic, facts, truth, feelings, emotion, relationship. You come into that conversation with someone from the opposite sex, and again, this isn't a marriage thing. This is any conversation. You're co-leader for life group. You're having a conversation about, something you're going to do. Recognize that you're coming at that from different perspectives, and that's good and it's healthy. God created us that way to do better together, right? So we need to make sure that we're listening to each other in those conversations and recognizing those tendencies. With that, because guys come at things with just logic and truth and facts, guys, you need to know that to a lot of the females in your life, you might be coming across as overly criticizing or harsh. That's probably not what you're intending, but because all you're doing is stating facts, it comes across as harsh because you're not taking into effect the emotion behind it and the relationship with it. Does that make sense? And then girls, because we approach it with that chain of events mentality, there's a tendency for us to come across in conflict as emotionally manipulative, right? And that's how guys tend to perceive a lot of the things that we say in conflict conversations. So we need to be cautious to make sure that we're holding our emotions in check as we have those conversations, and that we're using the emotions and the relationships and all of that, but also taking into perspective the logic and the facts to be able to communicate effectively. These differences make for some really colorful arguments. It's a lot of fun. But that's also probably why the Bible warns us to speak the truth in love, right? Because again, when we're communicating in love, we're thinking about how the other person is perceiving it, not just what we're trying to communicate. So a couple of verses here. James 1:19 says this. It says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." Quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. Proverbs 15:1 says, "A soft answer turns away wrath, but harsh words stir up anger." So there's a theme there, right? When it comes to conflict conversations, there's nowhere in the Bible that says, if you're going to have the conversation, it just says, when you do, this is how you do it, right? Have those conversations with gentleness, with respect, being slow to speak, slow to become angry. So bottom line of all this is just slow down and speak less, right? Slow down, calm down, and especially women, I'll pick on us again, watch your words. Watch your words. like Yale said at the beginning, it's easy for women to just kind of filibuster a conversation. Recognize that that's what you're doing, especially in a conflict, and rein that in a little bit, right? Okay, so here's a great verse, women. Write this one down. And sorry, but I didn't say it. The Bible does. Psalm 141:3 says, and this is a good one to memorize, set a guard over my mouth, O Lord, and keep watch over the door of my lips. There are a lot of conversations that I go into, and as I go into it, like I have my hand on the doorknob and I go, set a guard over my lips. Get a guard over my mouth, Lord. Like, help me not say the things that I don't need to say. Give me discernment, give me wisdom, give me love as I have this conversation. But also with that, just like, good words matter. Okay? Good words matter. And guys, especially for you, because like I said at the beginning, like guys tend to speak with less words and, how are you doing today? Good. Right? Like that's how guys tend to communicate. Learn more vocabulary. Get an app on your phone or something and learn more words, right? Just spend more time with Josh Wall and you'll have more words. It's great.
That didn't sound condescending at all. No, she's right though.
But in all honesty, like especially when we're emotional, especially when we're in the heat of a moment, we tend to go to just very basic things. Well, I'm angry. Well, I'm frustrated. Well, that made me mad, right? Okay, well, that's not super helpful. Right?
And then you got Josh who's like, I'm perturbed.
But it's helpful.
He's my brother,
that
I can say
speaks something way differently, right? Like, and women, we tend to do this more often and then we filibuster. But guys, like when all you say is, well, I'm angry, right? Well, you're probably not angry. Honestly, probably you're feeling disrespected. And that's very different from being angry. Like that is making you angry, but the root of it is you don't feel respected in the conversation. And that's what you need to communicate, right? So even when we're doing like premarital counseling with people, we have people do this fun little exercise where we say, okay, here's the template here. I want you to look at each other and say, I feel blank when you blank. All right? And then we give them like a whole page of like 200 words. I don't even know how many words are on the sheet. There's a ton of words. It's in teeny tiny font. And we say, pick
I think it's like
word.
3 pages long. We can email it to you guys if you want. Seriously, it really does help having like a choose one list.
Yeah, but it's just like using a different word. And then we always say, okay, don't pick a word that you usually use. Look down here and find a word that you don't usually use and then think of something that makes you feel that way and say it. And just like, that's really helpful because you're communicating in different words and you're helping the other person understand. So it's just building that communication. Yeah. Again, sorry, I skipped that part. Women tend to think, how does he not get how this makes me feel? Right? That's how we tend to feel in conversations with guys in our life. And guys tend to just not feel until they're forced to do so. Right? And then when they're forced to do so, it usually blows up. Like that's just kind of typically what happens. When we stuff our emotions, and that's male or female, but when you stuff your emotions, you're gonna blow up at some point. So learning how to have healthy conflict is really important. Conflict where you're seeking reconciliation, right? You're working through the end. You're not just having a hard conversation, but you're working it through with the relationship. Another just little practical things. One is be mindful of your timing in having conflict conversations, right? If you walk in on a Sunday morning and you walk up to, I'll use Greg because he's not in the room. If you walk up to Greg, our location coordinator, and you're like, I need to talk to you, man. And like church is starting in 2 minutes and he has to do announcements, like that's just mean. Don't be that way, right?
Say that again. Serious conversations after church. All right.
But just be aware of timing. You know what I mean? Like be aware of what's going on in their lives. Like if you're you're really frustrated with someone, like there are a lot of things happening in their life and you may or may not know what those things are. So just being aware of those things, knowing one another, right? It all comes back to relationship. When we live deeply in community and we know each other well, then we can communicate well and we can have conflict well. That's kind of what it boils down to. When we seclude and kind of ignore one another until something blows up, it's never going to be healthy.
Yeah. So now we want to talk, the last little section here is just talking about encouragement. So we've talked about how things are different and then the conflict, but also there's differences in how we show encouragement. So there's this book. Have you guys ever heard of The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman? Anyone heard of that? So it's actually technically a marriage book, but it doesn't have to have anything to do with marriage. Like just learning how people communicate and how they show love is for everyone. So there's actually 5 love languages that he talks about that are quality time, words of affirmation, acts of service, gift giving, and physical touch. And those are different ways that we show love to other people. The funny thing is when men and women were polled across the board, it was in the exact same order of most needed, except for 2 that were swapped. So for almost everyone polled, it was like 65% quality time was number 1, which is crazy. Words of affirmation was number 2, and then the second 2 were swapped for men and women. It was acts of service and gift giving, and the last one was physical touch. So it actually really surprised me just the order of those when people were polled. But which one is more important, I don't think changes based on gender, but how you do that thing changes drastically based on gender. So with quality time, men are more likely to want that quality time to be static. Like, we're going to do a normal thing together, sit on the couch together. That is quality time for me. Women are more likely to want thought to be put into it and have like a plan to go do something. Neither one is wrong. Like, really, neither one is wrong. And I know all of us are like, the first one's wrong. It's not, like if that is how a man is likely, or Jordan is likely, I mean, your head moved like full feet. I don't think you get to.
It's great to stare together.
So knowing the person you're talking to, knowing how your roommate likes having quality time, like knowing how your friend that comes over likes quality time is an important thing. Words of affirmation is a big one. Men are more likely to like make up nicknames and like have like kind of weird backhanded encouragements for people. And women are more likely to like look you in the eye and call out, "You're great at this thing. I just want you to know that." Both are good. And you have to be able, like guys, you have to learn how to take the encouragement, and girls, you have to learn how to realize that that actually is encouragement. It's a real thing.
Wow. All right.
Acts of service is a big one. Men are more likely to fix things or build something that's like out of the normal. Like they're going to do something that doesn't feel normal. Women are more likely to take care of everyday practical needs. So a woman is more likely to like do the laundry or do the dishes just to bless the person, and they completely miss it. And guys are often more likely to like fix something or build something, be like, "This is for you," and they're like, "Oh, okay, great." And you got to realize like what the intent was behind what they did. Gift giving is very similar too. Men are more likely to spend a lot of money on a gift, and that shows how much value they put in it. Women are more likely to create something or do something with like a deep meaning, and that shows how much they care. Where a guy could be like, "Well, so you're just cheap," and a girl could be like, "Oh, so you don't care at all. You got that at CVS. Fantastic," But knowing the intent behind...
You go shopping? I'm sorry, go on.
There used to be a CVS across the street. I was like, I need a name of a place.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and some people are just cheap and shop at CVS. That has nothing to do with gender. And then the last one is physical touch. Men are more likely to like pat you on the back or even do something that comes across as aggressive. Where a guy's like, "Hey, good to see you," and you're like, "Why would you hit me?" And women are more likely to like softly touch and linger and just like kind of like be there close to you. Like it's just a thing that happens. Neither is wrong. But I think also a lot of times these things can be taken wrong if you don't understand the original intent. Okay? Men, it's easy to take some of that stuff as flippant, as like you don't really care, or you haven't really done this because you didn't meet me where I am. Also, men often misread some of those things as sexual when they're not. Like that's one I really want you guys to get across or to understand, is that men often, you'll understand some of this stuff as like oh, I think she likes me, and like no, she was just showing encouragement to you. Women, I think it's easy to take some of these things as feeling unknown or feeling like something's impersonal when really it's not. It was really them trying to get across to you. And then women, I think it's also possible to misread some of these things as like, oh, that person hates me. You know, like they always call me this like sad nickname. Like, no, that means I like you because of this deep thing, you know, whatever. It's important to understand where that person is coming from. And also, you're allowed to ask questions.
What?
I know, it's crazy. Why did you shop at CVS? Like, why did you go to this place? Oh, you said you liked this thing 2 years ago and it was really expensive, so I saved up for it for 6 months. You're like, oh, no way. I guess you wouldn't save it for anything for 6 months at CVS. But you get the point. QVC, 3 other letters. Is that still a thing?
This is breaking down. Right?
I know, it really is. So the key to it is this, though. Proverbs 12:25 says, anxiety weighs down the heart, but a kind word cheers it up. You don't want the thing that you meant to be kind to come across as like, eh. So figure out how they receive encouragement, not how you would most likely want to give it. Does that make sense? I also think there's kind of a stigma just in culture as a general that men don't need encouragement. That's a thing pretty often that comes up is like men just like don't need that. They're not going to respond to it anyway. I would actually say I think that men need encouragement more than women. Women need to be told their value. There's a difference in those two things. I think encouragement can kind of encompass both, but often like men need to be told, again, because men are like afraid they're not going to be enough. You need to be told, hey, you're enough. You did this thing. Like, and this really meant a lot. I got you this gift to show you I'm so thankful for the way that you did this thing. I want to spend time with you because you're enough, because you're an awesome guy, whatever. And I think women often need value statements told about them. Like they need to be lifted up and, hey, this is where you bring value to this. You're not too much for me. You're not overwhelming. Like, this is such a good thing. Like, you said this thing and I loved it. So call each of those what you will, but I think how you communicate those things matter a lot.
Yeah, and I'm just going to throw in just a quick little plug here to remind us, especially those of you in the room who have kids, that like these things in communication and these things and how we respond to things start when we're like this big, right? So it's so important that we're like putting these things, instilling these things into our kids. And these gender norm things like really do matter, especially with young kids. Of recognizing that like if you have a daughter, she's probably thinking that like she needs value spoken over her, especially from her dad. So we have a lot of kids in our church that don't have a dad. So guys in the room, doesn't matter if you're a dad or not, look a kid in the eye when they're here and speak value over them. It matters. Like, it really, really matters. And the same thing for boys. Like, I didn't even ask permission. Ben, is it okay if I tell a quick story about you? Yeah. Okay, cool. There you go. I have permission. So Ben's birthday party is tonight, right? He's turning 12. It's great. We're excited. We're pumped about it.
6 o'clock dance party. Everybody come.
Come for a dance party. It'll be great fun. But one of the things that he really wanted at his party was a couple of years ago when we did this party, I put up just like big poster boards. It was when he turned 10 and it had like the big block letters of the number 10. And then all of you guys just wrote encouragements for Ben on there. And I don't know if you guys know this. If you haven't been upstairs at our house, then you probably don't know this. But he's had those in his bedroom, like he has a bunk bed, and they're on the wall, and he lays there and reads them like every night. And so one of the things that he asked for this party was, he's like, can you do that again with the number 12? And can I get some more? You know what I mean? Like, that's his heart, right? As a guy, right? He is looking for that. He's looking for, what did you say? What were the words? What are the guys looking for?
Encouragement.
No, you said.
I don't know what you're getting at here.
Men are,
that they're enough.
That was the phrase. Sorry. He's looking for someone to say you're enough, right? And he gets that through those encouraging words. So, like with our kids, that really, really matters. Even like leaning into those things and like providing those opportunities for them to experience that encouragement from one another and from the body of the Christ. So, but at the end of the day, just that reminder, right, that gender really does influence how we communicate, and it can be a tricky thing. But back to what Yale said at the very beginning of all this, he said it's our goal as believers to not only clearly express what's inside us, to clearly communicate what's inside of us, but also to do it in a way that builds people up. That's our goal in communication as believers, is communicating in a way that builds people up, that blesses them, that brings blessing into other people's lives. You are not just the way you are, right? You don't just communicate because that's how I communicate, right? It's just like anything else in your life. No, learn to be like Jesus, right? Shift the way you communicate. You can't just say, I'm an angry person because I'm Irish. Like, That's dumb. Quit. Stop saying things like that. That's dumb. Change who you are, right? Jesus died for that. So, not for the Irish. Well, if he died for the Irish, but he died. You get what I'm saying.
You're saying it's falling apart with me?
Yeah, well, is this recorded? But remember, like, literally, like, that's part of salvation. This is part of working out our salvation with fear and trembling, right? Is learning all of these skills and all these things. And, like, the skill of communication that you talk about in the business world or school or whatever very much applies to your walk with Jesus. And allow that to be the thing that you do. So choose to communicate like Jesus in the way that you do things. James 1:26 says this. Take a deep breath. Those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. We live in a state, in a city, where we know, we talked about this Friday night, the vast majority of people around us do not walk with Jesus, right? We know that. You're walking into your workplace, your family, your school, wherever you are, your dorm, and most of the people around you are not walking with Jesus. And if your communication and the way that you're communicating with people, the way that you're handling situations, the way that you're handling conflict doesn't look like Scripture, you look exactly like they do, then your religion is worthless to them. Does that make sense? Like, it sounds harsh, but like, again, the Bible said it, not me, right? Keep a tight rein on your tongue. Learn how to communicate like Jesus. Learn how to help people feel the love of God from you and things that you say and things that you do so that people will look at you and say, wow, that's different, right? And they will. Like, I've heard that so many times being in this city. Like, people all the time are like, why? Why are you the way that you are, right? And it's great opportunities to say, because Jesus, right? And be able
People say that to you in a positive way? That's amazing. Man, I need to change.
So here we go. Men, please take this to heart. Learn how to communicate your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions. Learn how to feel your emotions. If you need to, go spend time with Jesus and say, God, what am I feeling? Like, it's okay to ask that question. Figure it out. Learn some words. Say those words to people around you. But do that so that you can be a safe place for the women in your life, right? Look around you guys. The women around you in this room need you to be the protector, the provider that God created you to be. And when you communicate well, they feel that, right? And women, don't excuse your emotional state and just to dismiss your poor communication styles. All right? It's really, really easy for us as very emotional beings just to be like, oh, I'm just really emotional today, right? Like, okay, that doesn't give you license to be a jerk. So learn how to keep our emotions in check. Learn how to communicate effectively with one another. Be like Jesus. Back to our core verse that we said at the beginning, Ephesians 4:29. Don't let worthless words ever come out of your mouth. Make sure your words are not worthless, right? Only such speech as is good for building others up according to the need and the occasion, so that it's a blessing to those who hear you speak.
Yeah. The last thing really quick, I want to go over just the connection card that you guys got when you came in. We'll have the worship team come up. But does everyone have one of those cards? Does anyone need one? No. There's also a digital one in the app. You can follow along at the bottom of the sermon notes. But so there's a few practicals here I want to encourage you guys to do as you really live this out. The first one for men is I commit to practice communicating my thoughts and feelings this week. That is such an important thing. Like, men, if you just think that you're not an emotional person, it means you're shutting off an entire section of what makes you made in the image of God. Don't shut out the emotional side of who you are. Figure out how to tap into it and live it. The second thing is I'll be patient with people in my life as they over-communicate. I said people so no one gets in trouble. But be patient with the people that over-communicate and give them room to grow also. And then women, number one here is I commit to practice showing kindness regardless of my emotional state this week. And what Autumn said is so important. Like, we don't get to say, well, I'm just emotional so I can say this thing. Like, that's just excusing sin. And the second thing is I'll make an effort to listen to the nonverbal communication from people around me. So women, make sure that you're actually giving value to the nonverbal connection with other people. Or if you are just an overly verbal person, like people that are shrugging their shoulders are communicating something. People that are not making eye contact are communicating something. So learn how to read those things. And if you're a man that deals with one of the women, mark that too. If you're a woman that deals with one of the men, mark that too. At the end of the day, like Autumn said, the goal here is to look more like Jesus. The goal here is to communicate well with people around us. So, fill out that card. You can put it in the box there at the end. We're going to worship for a second and then take a little bit of time just to pray over Caleb and Callie. Well, Callie and Caleb as they have a baby. It's mostly you. And they are being induced this week, so we want to take a little bit of time to pray for them as they step into this new season. But let's stand up, let's worship, and we'll go from there.